Spotlight video. Okay. Let me know if you're not able to share your screen.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So we are going to be talking about Northeast India today. Initially, we will start off with an overview of the region, about what the region has to offer. And then I will take you all state by state through 4 of the major states where we currently are undertaking tours. And then we will end with a culmination of how we kind of put everything together and what questions to be asked to the client.
Perfect.
Right. So Northeast India is, initially it used to be called the Seven Sisters, and it was a conglomeration of 7 states, mainly with Assam at the heart. Then you had Meghalaya, you have Mizoram, Manipur, Nagaland, Arunachal Pradesh, and Tripura. But in 2003, Sikkim was also included in the Northeast. Though for our current presentation, we will not be talking about Sikkim. Our talk today will mainly be restricted to 4 states, which is Assam, Meghalaya, Nagaland, and Arunachal Pradesh. This is the places where tourists mainly travel to. Very, very few people, more and more people are going to Manipur. I've kept it out because of the time and all. But very few people actually travel to Tripura and Mizoram. So right now we will keep them out.
But you do plan towards Tripura and Mizoram also?
Yes, if required, yes, we do that. We do plan. Right, so Northeast is, in the context of India, it's 8% of the geographical area, but 25% of the forest cover of India is in the Northeast. And if you see, most of the states have like 50, 60, 70% of their state under forest cover even today, which obviously brings us to the fact that it becomes a diversity hotspot. So in the world, there are around about 30 biodiversity hotspots. And Northeast India is a part of one of these 30 hotspots in the Indo-Myanmar belt, which means that, it has mega diversity of all forms of life. So around 8,000 flowering plants, around 180 different species of mammals, 800 species of birds. So it's a very big birding hotspot. And yes, 178, which is amazing, 178 different tribes. And that is why actually Northeast India is more closely aligned to Southeast Asia, culturally and geographically, than to mainland of India. Because of that, there have been a lot of political issues in the past and all. People don't understand the region and all. Because the culture of this particular area is very, very different compared to that of the mainland India. And which is also one of the attractions for people to go over there. Again, it has a lot of adventure besides nature. It has a lot of different treks we can do. Meghalaya has the highest density of caves in India. It has roughly around 364 kilometers of underground cave network. Of that, the longest cave network is roughly around 31 kilometers. So it is not a single cave, but it is a network of caves which is interconnected. And you have a lot of rivers in the Northeast, mainly in Arunachal. So you have a lot of good rafting opportunities also. So it's a very big playground for those seeking adventure. And because you have culture, because you have such a big diversity of tribes, you also have a lot of culture to it. You have a lot of different festivals. There is some festival or the other happening every month, some place or the other in the Northeast. You have different kinds of dances, you have monasteries, you have Buddhist culture, you have tribal culture. So a lot of different cultural diversities. And yes, you have some absolutely awe-inspiring landscapes. So you have Assam, which is there in the plains, the land of Brahmaputra and all the other states are all hilly states with varying altitudes, starting from hills from 300 meters, going up till around 6,000, 7,000 meters, which is in the western part of Arunachal. So you have dramatic variations in landscapes and all, thick forests, alpine forests, you have rivers, you have valleys. So you have a huge variation even in terms of landscape in just this small area. So what are the opportunities which we are looking at? Okay, it is home to 65% of the species in our country. So you have a tremendous opportunity for wildlife and birding tours, nature-based tours, diverse diversity of tribes in India. So, you have cultural trips, which is mainly what foreigners come for. You have festivals. People know about the Hornbill Festival now, but even besides that, there are a lot of indigenous festivals which are happening throughout the year. You have the Buddhist circuit. So in in Northeast, you have two sects of Buddhism actually. So you have the one which you see in Ladakh and Tibet and all, which is your Theravada sect of Buddhism. And then the other sect of Buddhism is your, Mahayana sect. And then you have the Theravada sect, which is found in Sri Lanka and Myanmar and all. So you find both these in Arunachal Pradesh, which is a very, very unique thing. So you can see Buddhism from the perspective of what you see in the Tibetan tribes. And you can also see Buddhism, which you see in Southeast Asia, in Myanmar, Cambodia, Laos, Thailand and all. So both these different sects of Buddhism you can see in one state in Arunachal itself.
And Firan, what about Sikkim? You see which sect?
Sikkim is mainly what you see in Tibet. Okay. So which is your Mahayana Buddhism. So even in Mahayana you have a lot of different, so you have Nyingmapa and Karmapa and all. So those are mainly inherently from Tibet. And then you have, the ones which are in Southeast Asia, which is Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, Sri Lanka. They are all Theravada. It is considered the more orthodox kind of Buddhism kind of a thing.
And it's spread across Northeast, not just Arunachal.
Mainly, no. Buddhism is mainly in Arunachal.
Okay.
Right. So can everybody see the map? So we will now start off with Assam. So Assam is probably the largest state in Northeast.
I want a screenshot of this. Nice design it is.
Sorry?
Screenshot.
No, I can't hear you.
Someone saying something? Lynette, you're trying to say something? No, I think.
Okay, fine. So Assam is at the heart of Northeast. And if you look at this map, Assam kind of borders every other northeastern state. Okay, that is why it is the heart.
So you have just 1 second, someone saying that they can't hear you. I can hear you loud and clear. Anyone else or only Joy can't hear? Everyone else can hear, Firan?
I can hear. I meant to say...
yeah, we can hear.
Yeah,
yes,
who
we can
was
hear.
asking maybe that person.
Okay, fine. Sorry.
Should I continue?
Yes.
Sure.
Okay, right. So Assam is kind of at the heart of Northeast India. You have Meghalaya over here in the south, Tripura, Mizoram, Manipur, Nagaland. So basically kind of it is the heart, and that is why it also becomes the start point for most of the tours originating in Northeast India. So you have two main airports in Assam. You have one in Dispur, which is actually Guwahati, and you have one over here in a town called Dibrugarh, which is technically Upper Assam. So tours which are heading into certain parts of Arunachal Pradesh, into certain parts of Nagaland, will actually start from Dibrugarh. Tours which are starting from Meghalaya or from the western part of Arunachal will start from Guwahati. So it depends, but you guys just need to know that there are two major airports. One is in Guwahati, which is Dispur over here on this map, and the other is in Dibrugarh. And you have the largest river kind of originating over here, the Brahmaputra. And this whole valley is called the Brahmaputra Valley. Based on that, you have kind of some parts of Assam called Lower Assam, and you have these districts which are called the Upper Assam. So from Jorhat, from Kaziranga actually, from Kaziranga, Jorhat, it all becomes into Upper Assam. So why Assam? Assam has 4 national parks, because you also have to know a little bit of the geography that Assam is mainly in the plains. So you have a lot of grasslands, but you do have a lot of evergreen forest also. So you have 4 major national parks in Assam: Manas National Park, Kaziranga National Park, which probably is the most famous national park. Then you have Nameri National Park, and you have Dibru-Saikhowa. So the traditional safaris, the jeep safaris and all, are possible in the first 2 national parks, which is Manas and Kaziranga. They have different ranges, and you can do jeep safaris and all to see a lot of wildlife. Nameri National Park, on the other hand, is kind of on the foothills of Arunachal. So it is a hilly area, and you can only walk inside the park. There is no kind of a jeep safari in Nameri National Park. It is mainly we use it as a transit point into Western Arunachal, or we use it for people who are interested in birding. So it's a great place for birding. Something similar with Dibru-Saikhowa National Park. Dibru-Saikhowa National Park is actually a wetland. So it is a mix of forest and riverine islands and all. So Dibru-Saikhowa National Park, also there is no jeep safari. It is accessible in boats. So you actually have to get inside diesel boats and all and get into the park. Again, mainly good for birding. You won't see any big animals and all, wildlife as such. So for wildlife, it is Manas and Kaziranga. Obviously, you can do birding in these national parks also. But Nameri and Dibru-Saikhowa are specifically only for birding. You can't do any, you won't see any wildlife, and you don't have any jeep safaris. The other PSU of Assam is the tea gardens. So 50% of production of tea in India comes from Assam. So you have tea gardens all over, and mainly in the Upper Assam part, which is Dibrugarh, Jorhat, and those areas where you have vast tea gardens. So you can do tea tourism also in these parts. Then you have the Brahmaputra River, which gives you an opportunity for doing river cruises and all. There are only 2 or 3 companies which do high-end river cruises in the Brahmaputra, and they only happen in the months of October and November when the water level is high. Otherwise, Brahmaputra is a very, very wide river. It is not a deep river. In many places, the river is around 10-12 kilometers wide, but it is not very deep. That is why river cruises can only be done for a very short duration of time. The charge for the river cruises are generally around in the range of $300 per person per night, which is all inclusive. The other PSU of Assam is Majoli Island. So there is one island in the middle of the Brahmaputra River, That river is, that island is Majoli Island. It is a very big island. It is roughly around 600 square kilometers. And at one point of time, it was the largest river island in the world. A lot of tourists do go over there mainly for enjoying the rural landscapes, for getting a feel of the Brahmaputra, and enjoying the culture of the place. You have a very strong Vaishnavite culture. You have a couple of different tribes staying over there, so tribal culture, people who just want to experience the rural life, because stays and all over there are quite basic. So you can just relax, unwind, and enjoy the rural form of life in Majuli. And the only way, or probably I would say now it's not the only way, but till a few years ago, the only way to reach Majuli was by taking a boat. And now one point actually touches the land also, but only one section kind of Majuli now, because of denudation, erosion and all, touches the land, which is close to Dibrugarh side. But otherwise, mainly it is still accessible by boat. Now, what kind of accommodations are we looking at when we talk in Assam? So Assam has a good variety of accommodations. You have luxury properties, you have heritage properties, but these are mainly restricted in certain parts. So in Guwahati, in Manas, you have one luxury property. In Kaziranga, you have a couple of luxury properties. And the other luxury heritage properties are all in the tea estates. So you have probably 5 or 6 tea estates, where you can do luxury heritage stays. Most of the people we put up are in mid-budget hotels, which is the price range. So the figures I have given are their price range, just for you guys to have an idea. And then you have some homestays. Homestays, honestly, are not very well developed in Assam. There are very, very few places which have homestays. So what is the
sorry, when you said the options of staying at tea estates and boutique hotels, that's in the luxury range?
Yeah, that is in the luxury range.
Okay. Have you put up any India Someday guests in any of those? Because that's something that's a big draw. Like
yes,
foreigners really like it.
We have.
Okay.
So many of them in Dibrugarh, actually, we put them up in, there is one tea estate called Mankota.
Okay.
So we put them up over there. Generally, that is the place where we will end tours and all. Like, people want to have nice, relaxed way to end their tours and all. So we would put them up over there generally.
And it's the experience of staying on a working tea estate, and you can experience tea plucking and the processing and everything.
Yes. So there are a couple of tea estates in Dibrugarh. There are a couple of tea estates in Jorhat where you can stay. And there is one, Wild Mashir, which is close to Nameri, which is close to West Arunachal border.
And Firando, sorry, one more question. When you spoke about the luxury boat cruises that happen in October and November, so I think I know about those liners, but those are basically multi-day cruises. They go all the way to West Bengal, or
no? They are so they generally start from Guwahati and end in Dibrugarh.
Okay, so you have to always book it as a 4-5 night package, or
yes.
It's
you have to
fixed
book it as a 4-5 night package.
Okay.
Because in that, like, they'll do 1 night or 2 nights in Kaziranga, 1 night in Majoli. That is how it is done.
Got it. Snell, Viveka, like this is something that some of our foreigners do like doing. So I'll send you the links also. It's quite an established thing. There are a couple of tour liners. There's one also on the Ganga that goes.
Yes.
So a lot of old retired rich people like doing it. Like
mainly Americans.
They like doing it.
Yeah.
Keep that in mind. Sorry.
Right. So what is the season? The general season for Assam is from November to April. And that is also when the national parks are open. So the problem with Northeast India is that it starts receiving rainfall from April. So from April, May is the season for thunder showers. And kind of you can expect maybe 2 hours of rain in a day, or even more, probably towards after mid-April and all. And by June, kind of monsoons set into these parts. So June, July, August, September is kind of monsoon. And then by October, winter kind of sets in. So that is why all the national parks this season, the opening dates start from November, around 2nd of November. And they kind of shut sometimes in the third week of April or depending on the rain. Nowadays, since the last 2 years, they have started opening up Kaziranga from October also to get tourists and all. But the problem is that the entire round of the safari doesn't open at that time. So let's say one safari round is, let's say a circuit is roughly around 20 odd kilometers. You might probably be able to do only 8 or 10 in the beginning of October. Plus, they don't allow elephant safaris. So elephant safaris only start in November. And the park shuts again in end April or beginning May, depending on how much it has rained in that particular year. Average temperatures, roughly around daytime temperatures is 22 degrees. And the days are short from December to February. But even in the winters, it can rain anytime in the Northeast. So Northeast has its own kind of weather pattern. And it can rain absolutely anytime. If there is any disturbance in the Bay of Bengal, the weather will immediately get affected in the Northeast. Right, so does anybody have any questions for Assam before we move on to Meghalaya?
Firan, so with the elephant safaris that you're talking about, because some people ask for it, do they need to be pre-booked? Is it recommended or?
No, in Kaziranga, it doesn't work that way. So unlike other national parks, you cannot pre-book any of the safaris in Assam.
Or none
They have to be done, they are done one evening before.
Even the motorized car safaris and everything.
No, Jeep safaris is unrestricted. There is no restriction on the number of jeeps going in.
Okay.
Okay, so kind of that happens on the same day. But for elephant safari, you get the tickets 1 day in advance. The only thing is that foreigners are allowed to do an elephant safari only.
Oops.
Sorry, I think I got disconnected.
Yeah. So you were some foreigners and the elephant safari.
Yes, for foreigners, you can only do jeep safari in the central range of the park.
Mm-hmm.
For Indians, you can do, but they generally don't allow. They give first preference to foreigners. Indians generally do it in the western range of the park. So in Kaziranga, you kind of have 3 ranges. You have the western range, the central range, and the eastern range. There is no, you can do jeep safari in all 3, but elephant safaris right now only happen in the western and the central range. So central range, the elephant safari is done by the forest department itself. That is why foreigners are only allowed there. And in the western range, they have kind of given it to private parties, the elephants and all. So it is done, Indians go over there kind of a thing.
So sorry again, with the foreigners can do the jeep safari in which ranges?
They can do jeep safari, there is no restriction. They can do anywhere in the central, western and eastern. It's only the elephant safari where there is a restriction. So foreigners are only allowed to do it in the central range.
Okay. And is there any particular range which is better in terms of landscape or spotting of mammals? Or?
No, it depends on the season because internally it's all connected. So animals keep moving and all.
Okay.
And generally what we tell this is that let the hotels decide kind of like, which range you should go for a jeep safari because they have the latest updates in terms of animal movements and all.
Right.
There is a slight price variation also in terms of the jeep safaris for the different ranges, but we kind of take that into consideration during the costing part. So the client doesn't have to bother about that part. But there is a slight cost difference in the central range, western range and eastern range.
And Firan, when you're going on safaris in Kaziranga, the main draw is which kind of animals do you see?
It's mainly herbivores. So it's mainly people go there to see rhinos, and it's like savannas. You see herbivores in the hundreds over there actually.
So you see rhinos will be very common.
Yeah, you see rhinos, you see buffaloes, wild boars, deers in the plentiful. And from January, February onwards, once the grass gets low, you start seeing tigers also on and off. It has the highest density of population of tigers, but the park is very big, and it's grassland, and also it's difficult to see tigers. But you have plenty of tigers in Kaziranga.
But in generally, from a safari point of view, if someone says, I want to see tigers, we should just say that in Kaziranga, chances are you probably won't see it, even though there are a lot of there.
Yes.
Mavish, you had a question? You can unmute and ask.
So should I move on to Meghalaya?
Just 1 second. Mavish had a
Yeah.
question. Mavish? Okay.
Okay, we can take it later on also.
Okay, fine.
No worries. Right, so now let us move on to Meghalaya. This is a little kind of a cumbersome map, but this is the best I got. So you have, just a minute. So this is Shillong over here, which is the capital of Meghalaya. It is roughly around a 3-hour drive from Guwahati, 3.5 hours. It's a nice big broad 4-lane highway. And there is an airport in Shillong also, but there is only one flight a day from Calcutta. That is why if people have a paucity of time and they only want to do Meghalaya also, we do not suggest people to take a flight into Shillong, because there is only one flight, it gets cancelled, there is no flexibility. You'd rather fly into Guwahati, and from Guwahati, you can kind of very easily drive down to Shillong. So in Meghalaya, the tourism as of now is concentrated only in this particular section, which is called the Khasi Hills. So you have Shillong over here. You have Cherrapunji over here. Abbas, afterwards I can send you the maps also, so that people can enlarge them or something and see them.
Sure. But this is already all very good.
Yeah. Then you have a place, probably you guys can't see it, called Laikensu. This is where the double-decker route bridges are. And then there is a place called Dauki, which is becoming increasingly popular by the day. So these are probably 5 or 6 places, which are popular with tourists in Meghalaya. So why Meghalaya? Scenic landscapes, very picturesque landscapes. The weather is pleasant. It's never kind of hot over there. Shillong actually gets pretty cold in the winters. So generally in December, January, February, minimum temperatures or evening temperatures in Shillong will drop to around 4-5 degrees. So it's pretty cold. You have a lot of waterfalls. You have clear rivers. You have the route bridges, which are increasingly becoming more and more popular. You can do a lot of day hikes and some multi-day hikes also. And caving, as I said initially, Meghalaya has the highest density of caves, or it has the largest network actually of caves in India. It is mainly because of, the high precipitation and a lot of limestone formation in Meghalaya. That is why it has a lot of underground caves. But only some caves are open to tourists. Not all the caves are open to kind of tourists and all. There are 4 or 5 caves which are only open to tourists. What are some of the popular destinations in Meghalaya? So Shillong is probably the most popular destination, which is the capital. It is also a hill station. It used to be the capital of undivided Assam at one point of time. So you have a lot of cantonment area, you have a lot of trees and all. Then you have Cherrapunji, which is touted to be the wettest place on earth. But the irony is that in the winter months it becomes dry, and actually there is a shortage of water in the winter months from December to February, March. So all the water actually runs down into Bangladesh. So it rains, and because there has been a lot of mining and all, there has been a lot of cutting down of trees and all, water just kind of everything runs down into Bangladesh. Then you have this place called Dauki. I'm not sure if some of you know, and some of you all have seen pictures on Instagram. It's a very, if you just do a Google on Dauki, you will see a lot of pictures of a crystal clear river, you know, and these boats and all, which actually seem to be floating on air. So you can see the stones and all. It's a very picturesque place. Then you have Mawlynnong, which is the cleanest village in Asia. Unfortunately, it's becoming spoilt now. It's still a pretty village, but way too many people actually go over there. In season time, it's a small village of, let's say, 100 houses or so. In sometimes you can have as many as 1,000 people over there. So it's completely insane. Sometimes it gets disgusting also, actually. So we nowadays don't send too many people to Mawlynnong also, because it can actually become a kind of a put-off. But besides these popular places, there are a couple of offbeat places which are now coming up. One place is called Mawphanluh. These are names which are difficult to pronounce and all, so it's not a problem if you can't pronounce them. There is one more river island called Nongkhanam, which is supposed to be the second or third largest river island in Asia. Again, these are all places, you know, where you can enjoy the scenic landscapes and all. And then there is another place called Mawlongbana. So these are all villages from where, like, you know, you can do some short day hikes and all, or you can enjoy, you know, just the scenic landscapes. Again, Meghalaya, in terms of accommodation, you have some luxury properties, but the luxury properties are only there in Shillong and in Cherrapunji. That's it. Once you move out of Shillong, Cherrapunji, it all becomes kind of basic. There are a lot of mid-budget properties which have now mushroomed up in Shillong and in Cherrapunji. You have homestays, and you also have some campsites, because Meghalaya has rivers. You have a couple of campsites. So you have a couple of campsites near Dauki. You have one or two new campsites come up near this Nongkhanam Island. So you have a couple of campsites all around Meghalaya. Then the season for Meghalaya kind of depends on the interest. So it is probably one of the northeastern states, I can say, where you can do probably tourism throughout the year, besides, you know, June, July, August, where it rains really very, very heavy. So the general season, if we are clubbing it up with, you know, other destinations and all, will be October to April. If you want to do camping, and you know, there are some people, especially Indians, who say that, you know, we want to see, or we want to go to Dauki, we want to see the crystal clear river. So there is a short season for that. That is mainly from mid-October to March, when it is not raining. Because as soon as it rains, the river kind of gets muddy, and you will not be able to see, you know, the crystal clear river as you generally see in the pictures and all. So if you want to do camping, if you want to stay in campsites, and if you want to, you know, see those river views, then you will have to do it in the dry months, which is generally from mid-October or November to March. Consequently, if you want to see waterfalls and if you want to see the greenery, you have to go from May to November. You know, from when the monsoon starts to probably a month or two after the monsoon gets over. There is also a corollary to this, is that after November, from December onwards, from December to kind of end March, the landscapes become extremely dry. So Shillong area has pine forests and also it's a little green. But once you drive out of Shillong to go to other destinations, you will only see kind of yellow dry grass and all in these months. So the landscapes kind of become a little bit more barren towards after December. So January, February, March, you can still do your hiking and all, but purely in terms of landscapes, you will not see greenery at that time in those months, in the winter months. If some people are interested in caving also you can do only in the dry months, which is from November to mid-March, because once it rains, it becomes dangerous. The underground passages get inundated with water. And then you can do hiking. There is a plenty of opportunity to do day hikes, multi-day hikes in Meghalaya. That again, you can do it from September to May. Right? Depends. Some places will not be accessible in certain months. Some places will be accessible in certain months. Sorry. Right. So again, hiking, the most popular hike I can say is to the double-decker route bridges. But even along with that, you know, we have now started making some hiking itineraries also for Meghalaya, where you can do probably a 4 or a 5 day tour, hiking tour kind of a thing in Meghalaya, by staying in homestays or staying in the villages and all, by staying in village stays and all. We had recently done it for one India Someday client. Unfortunately, because of Corona, the trip couldn't go through, but it was scheduled for April, first week of April. So we can do a 4 or 5 day hiking tour also in Meghalaya now. Right. So before we move on to the next state, which is Arunachal, any questions for Meghalaya?
Nell, you had a question?
Yeah. Can one go swimming in Davki or snorkel over there?
Yeah, you can do swimming in most of the rivers. If it's clear and all, you can do swimming. There is one outfit which used to do scuba diving also in Davki, but I think they no longer do it. But yes, if you take your own snorkel and all, you'll get to see some fish and all. You can do snorkeling, you can do kayaking in the dry months, basically.
Farhan, Mavish was asking, when you're talking about the campsites in Meghalaya, what exactly are they like? I mean, are they like proper like alpine tents or like Swiss tents with
no, they're
beds?
not Swiss tents. So they are all the campsites are either dome tents or A tents, and some of them or most of them would have non-attached, like an Indian and a Western toilet or something of that sort. But they are basic. The campsites are kind of basic. So you have A tents. They will provide you sleeping bags or blankets or something and a mat. And you know, there would be a kind of a toilet block or something with 2-3 toilets or something.
But the drawers, you'll be in very picturesque settings.
Yes, you would be in picturesque setting.
And Farhan, the trekking, so Meghalaya's, the hills are, it's not part of the Himalayas, no? It's a different hill
It's
range.
not part of the Himalaya. So you have the Meghalaya Plateau. They are a part of the Meghalaya Plateau, basically. Roughly, Shillong is roughly around 4,300 feet.
Okay.
And it's probably the highest. So it's between 4,000, 3,000 feet kind of a thing.
Okay, so it's kind of like trekking in the Sahyadris kind of
Yes,
altitude.
you can say it's more of trekking the Sahyadris, more of greenery and all.
Okay, and see, you cross villages and things like that?
Yes,
like,
you cross some villages and all also, yes.
Okay, so it's not about mountain vistas like the Himalayas, but it's like overall landscape.
Yes, it's like overall landscapes and like, you know, rivers, and also if you pass through the river, like, you know, you can take a dip or something of that sort. And as I said, a major draw for a lot of people are the root bridges and all also.
And the root bridges, of
Yeah.
course. Are you seeing a lot of foreigners coming to Meghalaya Is it
Yes,
popular now?
yes, a lot of independent. So independent traveling in Meghalaya is now becoming quite easy. So a lot of backpackers and all are getting kind of over there. So there is a very strong trend of going to Meghalaya. It's relatively easy to travel also. So a lot of people are going there now.
Great.
And as a state, it kind of can be done standalone also. Like if you have only a few days at hand, let's say you have 6-7 days at hand, you can easily do Meghalaya in that time frame, like, without traveling too much. You can probably do Arunachal also in 8 days, but then you're driving for 7-8 hours, like, from one place to another in Arunachal. Whereas in Meghalaya, you probably, to go from one place to another, you probably are traveling for 2.5 hours at the max.
Nice, nice. And Meghalaya best combines with Assam in terms of if you're doing like a 2-week itinerary, or
See, if you're doing something very short, like an 8-day thing, then yes, it will best go with Assam. You can club it with Kaziranga, you can club it with Manas. So from Kaziranga to Shillong, it's roughly a 7-hour drive.
okay,
So, if people have 8 days, then, we'll do 2 nights in Kaziranga and the remainder in Meghalaya, kind of a thing.
cool, thanks. Joy, you had a question?
Yeah, I wanted to ask, Meghalaya being such a picturesque place, means are there cycle tours or any convention tours? Would you suggest? Are there?
Sorry, I'm not able to hear you clearly. I heard something cycling. Are there any cycling tours or something?
Yeah, Farhan is asking Joy if there's any cycling tours.
Yeah, means there is a lot of cycling happening also, and we've not done it for foreigners, but we've done a cycling tour in Meghalaya for 2 Indian groups also. So yes, it is possible. It is possible
Okay.
to do cycling tours. But like, let's say if they only want to cycle for a day or something, then we can arrange it only from Shillong. We get cycles on hire from Shillong also. But let's say if they want to do a longer cycling tour, like let's say a 6-7 day one, then we have to get cycles from Assam itself.
And
So
then
we can
you
get
can
cycles from Assam and then arrange the tour for them.
like a supported tour with a.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Great.
Right. So can we move on?
Actually, I had one question. So, I see that there are a lot of activities. So, is it that you organize all these activities, or is there any particular tour company that we should look up to when we are?
No, so generally when I do the tour, I arrange for the activities. I might take support of some other local guides and all, but I will do all the arrangements and everything. So if they are doing hikes and all, let's say, I will arrange for local guides for them. If they are doing caving, there will be an expert caving guide with them. If there is kayaking will generally be associated with a campsite. So you can't do kayaking standalone. You can do kayaking in Dauki, or there is another campsite in a place called Mausindram. So, they have their own kayaks and all. So you will do it that way, kind of a thing.
Okay.
And Farhan, sorry, when you're the caving, so this is like a 1-day experience, like it's like you're
Yes,
trekking
it's
the
a
cave.
1-day experience. Yes.
Cool.
Right. So should we move ahead?
Yes. Any other? Yeah,
Any other questions?
I think we're good.
Okay. Good. So the next state is Arunachal. I think in terms of area and all, Arunachal probably is the largest from all the northeastern states, and it is also the least populated state in India. It's amazing. It has a density of population is roughly around 17 or 18 per square kilometer. So that's the kind of population which Arunachal has. And mainly you have tribes. So you have different tribes. You have 26 major tribes in Arunachal. You have a lot of forest cover. So you can do a lot of jungle treks, birding, But again, in Arunachal, in the forest, you cannot drive. So you don't have any jeep safari kind of forests and all. It's all on foot. And the capital is Itanagar. It's probably one of the only capital cities which still doesn't have an airport. So if you want to get into Arunachal, you have to either start from Guwahati. So if you want to do the Tawang sector, you will fly into Guwahati. Or if you want to do the central or eastern part, you will actually fly into Dibrugarh, which would somewhere be over here. Arunachal, you have destinations, but Arunachal mainly you have circuits. Arunachal has 5 major rivers and the circuits, so you have 5 major valleys and your circuits are arranged in that way. Because there is no road which is like a trans Arunachal, so you can't go from west to center through Arunachal. For every circuit, you actually have to go up into the valley, come down into Assam and again get back. You have to come down and again get back. They are now slowly connecting certain places, but at least for West Arunachal and other parts, you cannot kind of directly get into from Arunachal. You have to come down into Assam and then get back into Arunachal again. So you have 5 major rivers and
Firan, just 1 second. So girls, in many ways, Arunachal Pradesh is also like is mainly a Himalayan state. Firan, correct me if I'm wrong. So it's the way what we face with Himachal, like you have 2 destinations that look very close by, but you still have to get down one mountain range and up into the other. So it's like that, correct?
Yes, it is.
So that's why you have to sell it in a circuit.
Right.
Like Himachal.
So you have starting from west to east. So the first major river is Kameng and your Tawang circuit kind of comes in this area. You have the Kameng river. Okay. Then you have the Subansiri river. And Zero, I'm guessing most people or a lot of you have heard of this place called Zero. So your Zero Valley actually comes in the Subansiri circuit. Then you have this river, the Brahmaputra, which is actually called the Siang in Arunachal. Then you have Dibang river, which becomes, so Siang and Subansiri are considered central Arunachal. Dibang Valley kind of becomes eastern Arunachal. And then you have another river over here called Lohit. This Anjao where you see, so there is another river flowing in from China, which is the Lohit river, which eventually flows into the Brahmaputra. So that also is Lohit Valley and that also is an eastern Arunachal. So you have 5 major rivers, Kameng, Subansiri, Siang, which is Brahmaputra. In the east, you have Dibang and Lohit. That is how the kind of circuits are arranged in Arunachal. Why Arunachal? You have tribal tours, big on culture. You have 23 different tribes. That is what most foreigners come into Arunachal for, mainly to see the tribes. You have dense forest, very thick forest. Then you have treks. You have 2 types of treks. You can do the Himalayan treks or the alpine treks. Though those are only restricted in the western part of which is your Tawang Valley side. In the other parts, you which go to the forest and all. Birding is a very big thing in Arunachal. Most birding tours, global birding tours all come into Arunachal because you see birds over here which you don't see anywhere else in the world. There are some rafting tours also which happen on some of the rivers. They happen on the Siang River and on the Subansiri River. And you have a lot of good angling also happening on some of these rivers. So you have angling tours also which happen, though I personally don't do angling tours because I don't have the expertise.
Angling is basically fishing.
Fishing, yeah. Right. So let's go through some of the circuits. So the Tawang circuit is the circuit for Western Arunachal. Ideally, you would start from Guwahati. You come to a place called Bhalakpong, which is on the border of Arunachal Pradesh and Assam. From there, you kind of enter into the valley created by the Kameng River. So the first place is a place called Dirang. From Dirang, you drive into Tawang. Tawang becomes your high point. From Tawang, you again get down to a place called Bomdila and then Nameri. So there are a couple of things. One is that in this circuit, the distances are long. So to drive from, once you leave Bhalakpong, so Guwahati to Bhalakpong, you are kind of in the plains. Once you cross Bhalakpong, you kind of are in the hill areas. And the roads really are not that great. In terms of distance, Bhalakpong to Dirang is roughly, I would say 160, 170 odd kilometers, but it will take you 7 to 8 hours to reach because the roads are winding, the roads are bad. But there is no harm in going slow because the landscapes are absolutely awesome. You're passing through dense greenery throughout. So you have the river on one side and you have green mountains on the other. Same way for Tawang, from Dirang to Tawang is roughly around 160 odd kilometers, but it will take you 7 to 8 hours. And on this road, you cross a high pass called the Sela Pass, which is roughly around 13,700 feet. Again, in Tawang, you have monasteries and all, but you also have some glacial lakes above Tawang, which I don't know if you all have heard of Madhuri Lake and Sangetsar Lake and all. So there are some glacial lakes where Indians are allowed, but foreigners are not allowed over there because these are areas very close to China border. Foreigners are not allowed to see, go to these glacial lakes. So that is one thing which you guys ought to know. Then comes your central Arunachal circuit. This circuit, actually, you can either start from Guwahati or you can start from Dibrugarh. And then you come into a place called Nameri, which is again on the border of Assam and Arunachal. And then you go into Zero. So this is the Zero Valley where you have the Apatani tribe and all. Probably you all have heard of the Zero Music Festival and seen a lot of picturesque landscape photographs of Zero Valley and all. It is actually a very, very beautiful place. Then from Zero, you have to drive to a place called Daporijo, which is on the upper Subansiri river. From Daporijo, you come to a place called Along. From Along to Pasighat and then exit out of Dibrugarh. This circuit has some issues. One is that the roads are very bad. So again, distances are not that great. But currently the road conditions from Zero to Daporijo and Daporijo to Along are not very great. And I have been told that, you know, it takes roughly around 8 to 9 hours to reach Daporijo from Zero. And you have some tribes, but there is not much to see and do in Daporijo. Plus, you only have one hotel, one good, decent hotel where you can stay. So sometimes we arrange our circuits, or nowadays I'm trying to arrange my circuits in a way that I kind of avoid this place. From Zero, I might again go down into Assam and again come up into Arunachal. So you don't need to know things in depth, but this is just to give you an idea of how bad the roads are in these areas. Again, from Daporijo to Along, the road is quite bad because of road widening and all. It will take around 8 hours, 9 hours for a distance of 160 odd kilometers. Then you have Dibang Valley becomes the eastern part of Arunachal. And you have different tribes over here. So, okay, sorry. In Zero, you mainly have a tribe called as the Apatani tribe. Y'all can search them up. Y'all must have seen maybe some pictures of Zero Music Festival. At that time, you might have seen pictures of women with some nose plugs and all. So that is why also they are kind of famous. Then in Daporijo, you have a tribe called as the Tagin tribe. Sorry. And in Along, you have a tribe called as the Galo tribe and the Adi tribe. They are all kind of interrelated. The main family of tribes in central Arunachal is the same, but there are still differences in the tribes. So somebody who's interested, greatly interested in culture and all, for them it becomes a great circuit to do. Then you have Dibang Valley, which is your eastern part of Arunachal. So that you would, again, your start point now changes. It doesn't make sense to fly into Guwahati. If you want to do the eastern part of Arunachal, you have to fly into Dibrugarh. And from there, you go to a place called Roing, which is the gateway actually to Dibang Valley. This entire valley is inhabited by a tribe called as the Idu Mishmi. And in these parts, the villages are very sparsely populated. So one village might just have one house also. And there are quite a few villages which will just have 2 or 3 houses. So that is how it is in these parts. So forests are vast, enormous and all, but population in these parts, in the eastern part of Arunachal, is very, very thin. So you might also have to actually hike to, visit some villages and all. So this circuit, again, Dibang Valley, it's a linear circuit. You get into the valley and you again come back out the same way. Or you can club it with the other valleys also. So this becomes Dibrugarh. You can go to Pasighat, you can go Roing, you can come to a place called Vakro, which is on the foothills of the Lohit river, and you have Namsai. So this place called Namsai is where those Theravada Buddhist sect is. So this is also one of the places where you have the Buddhist tribes. So in Tawang, you have the Buddhist tribes which align themselves to Tibet. So it is, and actually it is of the Gelugpa. The main Tawang monastery is of the Gelugpa sect, which is the Dalai Lama sect. And when he fled from Tibet, he actually came in from here. He came in from Tawang side. But the kind of Buddhism you see in this Namsai area is the one which you see in Southeast Asia, which is Cambodia and all. And the monasteries over here, even the artwork and all, actually has been done by monks who have come down from Myanmar and all. So they have a very close association. And indeed, even these tribes, so the tribe is called Thai Khamti. You have some Thai tribes. They have originally come into India, into these parts of Arunachal from Myanmar. They are originally from Myanmar and from Kunming part of China. And sometime in the 15th, 16th century, they have come down into these parts. So besides the cultural tours in Arunachal, you can also do some forest treks and birding tours. So you have some wildlife sanctuaries, Eagle Nest Wildlife Sanctuary, which is very, very famous birding hotspot. You have Tale Valley Wildlife Sanctuary, which is in Zero. So you can do probably a 3-day or a 4-day trek from Zero into this wildlife sanctuary. Then you have one more sanctuary called Pake Tiger Reserve, which is actually adjoining the Nameri Reserve in Assam. And you have one tiger reserve in the eastern part of Arunachal called Namdafa National Park. So all these national parks, you cannot do any jeep safari. You either have to trek on foot. Sorry, not either. Trekking on foot is the only option of getting into all these national parks. So only if you are fond of wildlife and nature, or if you are fond of birding, would you actually get into these national parks. So that is how Arunachal is. Most people would either go there for the cultural circuits, or they would go there for seeing birds and wildlife. But yes, if somebody wants, we can do a mix and match also. Again, in terms of circuits, it would depend on the number of days at hand people would have, and the type of tribes they want to see. So if, let's say, somebody says they only have 8 days at hand, then I will only give them one circuit. But sometimes what happens is that they have 8 days at hand and they will tell me that I want to go to Tawang and I want to do 0. So I tell them, I'm sorry, that is not possible, because they are two different valleys. I cannot drive you directly from Tawang to 0. If you want to go from Tawang to 0, you will have to actually get into the Tawang Valley from the first circuit, again come down, not go up till Guwahati, but come down till Nameri and then again go up. So if you only have 8 days or let's say 9 days, then you only do one particular circuit. Only if you have more days at hand will you do an extended circuit. And if you have many days at hand, there are some people who do 20, 25-day tours. I can club up 2 or 3 circuits also. Now coming to accommodations. In Arunachal, you do not have any luxury accommodations. You only have mid-budget hotels and you have homestays. In most places, we try to put people up in homestays in Arunachal because service levels in hotels and all is pathetic. There is no guarantee of service outside of the Tawang circuit. In Tawang, Dirang side, the circuit is well established. You know, many Indians go over there. It's very popular with the Bengalis and all. So that is why, you know, there are lots of hotels and hotels provide good service, good food and all. But once you leave this circuit, okay, then staying options in other parts of Arunachal is very limited. In 0 also there are some hotels and homestays and all, mainly come up due to, you know, this 0 music festival and all. But otherwise, in most other places, you only have 1 or 2 homestays, you know, where we would generally put up tourists, where we are very sure of the kind of service, cleanliness and everything we will get for our tourists. So that is how it is in Arunachal. What is the season? So for tribal tours, the season would be probably from end September to April or maybe till May. Because once rains come in, you know, the road conditions get very bad and you may not be able to negotiate certain roads and all. That is why we do these tribal tours from September to April. If some people are interested in forest treks, then you can only do it in the dry months, which is from November to March. And November to April also is the general birding season in Arunachal. If somebody wants to do alpine treks, those are only possible in the western part of Arunachal, which is in the Tawang and Dirang Valley side. You have 2 seasons. One is you have September to November, and then you have, after the winters, you have an April-May season. So these are the 2 windows for doing alpine treks in Arunachal. Right, so does anybody have any questions for Arunachal?
Firan, with the alpine treks, these are possible for foreigners or most of them are in restricted areas?
No, they are possible for foreigners.
Okay, they're possible for foreigners.
Yeah.
And overall, the homestay qualities you stay are consistently good, or even that can be?
No, generally, I would say they are good. In some places, they might be basic. In eastern Arunachal, they are a little basic.
Okay.
But otherwise, they are consistently good. Means whatever basic you expect for, you will get, kind of a thing.
And I know in certain places like the glacial lakes in Tawang, above Tawang, you said specifically foreigners are not allowed.
Yeah.
Most of the other places that we mentioned, foreigners
Yes,
allowed.
all
And
these places which are mentioned, yes, foreigners are allowed.
okay.
The other thing is that because Arunachal is close to, though I'll be covering this later on also, Arunachal is close to the China border.
Right.
Foreigners need a special permit called RAP, Restricted Area Permit, to visit Arunachal. It takes roughly around 10 days for me to process this permit. and costs roughly around $60 per person.
Okay. So these
For
are
the
the
permit, I need a copy of their passport and visa, and they have to fill out a form. And this is kind of a 30-day permit they give you. They give you a kind of blanket 30-day permit to travel in whatever tourist circuits we have mentioned in Arunachal. And it is for a minimum of 2 people.
okay. And the form they have to like fill it and scan it and send it.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. So,
Cool.
right. So this is the 4th and the final state which we will be covering, which is Nagaland. Nagaland also it's mainly all tribal tours. And you have Mon, which is northern Nagaland. So tours start from there. Then you have a place called Mokokchung, which is central Nagaland. Then you have Kohima, which is a little south center. And Dimapur is in the plains. So Nagaland also again is a kind of completely hilly state. So except for Assam, all the other northeastern states are all hilly states. That is also to be borne in mind. So why Nagaland? Mainly people go into Nagaland for tribal culture. You have 16 major tribes in Nagaland. Of that, probably the most popular ones are the Konyak Naga tribes, because they still have tattoos on their face and their chest and all. So at one point of time, all the Naga tribes were headhunters. They used to hunt enemy heads. And once they hunted these heads, they had the right to make certain kind of tattoos, either on their face or on their chest and all. And once Christianity came in, the missionaries slowly stopped or did away with these practices and all. But you still have the older generation of people who have these tattoos and all. That is why a lot of people go to Nagaland to see this one particular type of tribe which still has the tattoos. So only the older generation, probably this is the last generation which has these tattoos and all. Most of them are already in their mid 80s and early 90s and all. So a lot of people go to see these tribes called the Konyak Nagas. They are in Mon, which is in northern Nagaland. All the other tribes, you will not see, none of the other tribes you will see these facial tattoos and all anymore. Then because you have so many tribes, you obviously have festivals. And today Hornbill Festival has become probably the most famous festival all over Northeast. But besides that, you have a lot of other indigenous festivals also happening. So probably the second most festival is the Owling Festival, which happened in April, which is of the Konyak Naga tribes. And you have a good deal, I would not say as much as Meghalaya, but you have a good deal of greenery even in Nagaland and all. That is why you have some opportunity to do hikes in certain areas also. So kind of now why Nagaland? So Nagaland mainly people come, as I said, for the Konyak tribes, at least the foreigners and all know about them. So you have Mon, which is the Konyak headhunter tribes. Then you have a place called Mokokchung, which is in central Nagaland. So you have a tribe called as the Ao Naga. Mainly tribal culture means you will over here, once you start getting into the other villages, you will only get to see the village life. Houses and all are no more traditional. But in most of these tribes, they have a culture of the male dormitory. So in the earlier days, the young people, the younger boys, before they get married, they stayed in dormitories called as the morum. So in most of the villages, you will have a traditional dormitory, which probably, still has the traditional architecture and all. So probably that is the only piece of traditional architecture which will be there. Otherwise, in all villages, you will kind of have modern brick houses or mud houses or something of that sort. Then in Kohima, you have the Angami tribe. Again, there is one more very famous village around Kohima called as Khonoma. It is a very picturesque village, and it is the first green village of India. Now, another interesting thing is that in Northeast, all the land actually belongs to the people. The government doesn't own any land in the Northeast. So even if the government wants to make a road, if they want to make their own building, they have to buy land from the people. This was one of the constitutional rights which they had got when the northeastern states were formed. So land can either be owned by an individual, it can be owned by a clan, which is, you can relate it to a family, like a extended family, or it can be owned by a village. And there are very strict boundaries of all these three possessions. So that is why in Nagaland you don't have any wildlife sanctuaries or anything of that sort. So even all the forest and rivers and everything is owned by the people in either of these three modes. Which is why when we were doing conservation, it had become necessary to involve the local communities. Also inherently all these tribes were hunters and gatherers. That is why they did a lot of hunting. In the olden days, obviously it was for self-sustenance, but slowly, as people from outside started coming into the Naga Hills and all, it started becoming commercial. Because of this, this one village called Khonoma, they started seeing all these changes. They started seeing that there is a lot of logging happening in their forest. And they were making money, but it was mainly, all this was for outsiders and not for their benefit. That is why they were the first village in India actually to ban logging and hunting in their village. And that is, it became a very big thing. It was a very, very big news because culturally hunting is a very, very big thing for Naga tribes. A lot of all their festivals and everything kind of revolves around hunting. Hunting is a necessity in their culture. And to ban hunting of animals in their forest area was a very, very big step. That is why it got demarcated as the first, or notified as the first green village in India. Nonetheless, it's a very, very pretty village. It has very picturesque terrace farms and all. So that is also one of the attractions in Nagaland. In terms of tourist circuit, this is how the tourist circuit is arranged. So you fly into Dibrugarh and you start from north, you get into Mon, you then drive down into Mokokchung. Again, there is one internal road, but the road condition is very, very bad. It's a Kacha road. That is why from Mon, you have to actually come down into Assam and get back into Mokokchung. And this journey roughly takes around 8 to 9 hours. Even from Dibrugarh to Mon, even though it's hardly 120 kilometers, it will roughly take you around 5 to 6 hours to drive because the road conditions are quite bad. Then from Mokokchung, you would come to Kohima, which is the capital city of Nagaland. From Kohima, you would drive down to Khonoma, and then you would exit out of Dimapur. You would drive down into Dimapur, which is in the plains, and Dimapur also has an airport. You can either fly out or you can probably go to Kaziranga or something of that sort. Of late, another place which has become increasingly popular in Nagaland is Zuku Valley. Probably those who are on Instagram and all might have seen pictures of Zuku Valley, kind of beautiful rolling hills and all. It's a very picturesque valley where you have the possibility of doing hikes and all. You can either do a one-day hike, which becomes a little bit tedious. You need to be really fit. You can start from Kohima early in the morning and come back to Kohima, but that would involve 9 to 10 hours of walking. Otherwise, you can stay in the valley also, because the valley itself is very picturesque, and you have dormitories over there. You have 2 dormitories, but you can carry your own tents, or we can arrange to pitch tents also over there. Because it is now becoming increasingly popular, it also has a drawback, is that a lot of people are now starting to going there. So you don't have just tourists, but you have a lot of student groups also from different parts of Nagaland or from Kohima, going to Zuku Valley. So there could be times when you have 200-300 people over there. And that is why, for some clients, it kind of kills the fun, because it's a very picturesque place. You need to absorb and enjoy the beauty, enjoy the serenity. Unfortunately, the reality is different. If, there is another group, or there are 2-3 groups over there which come, like, on the campsite, you can have 200-300 people, which really becomes a little disgusting. So that is a little bit of a drawback in this Zuku Valley. But otherwise, it's an easy hike, and it's very, very picturesque also. In Nagaland, again, you have either mid-budget hotels or homestays. Not too many places where you can stay. In Mon and Mokokchung, probably you just have 3 homestays where you can stay. And same is for Mokokchung also. Only in Kohima, you have quite a few hotels and all. This becomes a kind of a bottleneck or a constraint during the Hornbill festival time, because most people want to do a tour of Nagaland. At least most foreigners want to do a tour of Nagaland during the Hornbill festival time. And tours get booked nearly 1 year in advance. It's becoming so crazy and commercial is that when a group or a hotel group comes to a hotel in Kohima, let's say they came in 2019, they will do their booking for 2020 when they leave. And even in these places, in Mon Mokokchung, they will not do a booking 1 year in advance. But because there are only 2-3 homestays, if other tour operators have already done, or other people have already done bookings, then you will not get place to stay. So that is a little bit of an issue for people who want to do tours during Hornbill festival time. We tell them that you have to book and confirm at least 6 months in advance. Only then we can guarantee getting hotel rooms. But if you want to do tours outside of Hornbill festival, then even though there are only 2-3 homestays or 2-3 hotels, you will still get accommodation, because very few people actually visit Nagaland. The best season, again, because it's a tribal state and all, is from October to May, mainly because of the monsoons and no other reason. Because once it starts raining, the roads get really very bad over there. Right, so that is come to an end also. Nagaland also is come to an end. Do you all have any questions?
Firan, when you spoke about Zuku Valley, about there being a lot of trekkers and this, but if you avoid weekends and if you avoid school holidays, then even then you could like be there on a weekend.
Yeah, if you avoid weekends, then maybe it might be better.
Okay.
But nowadays it's very difficult. It's becoming very difficult to say.
Okay.
So I think you remember even Sophie had an issue with that. Like, once she got on top, I faced a similar issue with one more client also.
Mm-hmm.
Like, who was quite unhappy once they got on top. With so many people and all, it kind of kills the charm of the place, unfortunately. But the place itself is very, very beautiful.
Right, right.
The problem is that we can pitch tents somewhere else, but that is the only place where there is a water point and all also. So, then to pitch tents somewhere where you don't have water and all also becomes of an issue. Right. Any questions about Nagaland?
And Hornbill Festival, would you still recommend it this, or does it get too touristy now? If you book well in advance, it's still worth it?
No, it kind of touristy in the sense, see, I have also been going to the Hornbill Festival since 2009. I've gone there continuously for 7 years. In terms of touristy, I would say yes, more number of tourists are coming, but the festival more or less is still the same. So you do get to see a lot of traditional dances and everything. You get to taste their traditional food, the traditional brew and all. And it does have an electrifying atmosphere also. So in that sense, the festival has remained same. They haven't made changes to the festival. So what you see, the dances and all are still very, very authentic. And the government itself is trying to encourage, people to maintain their traditional dances. So what they do is, from every tribe. So generally every village in Nagaland still will have their own cultural dance troupe in the village. And every year they select different villages. Okay, so it's not like every year the same village or the same cultural troupe will come to the festival. They give an opportunity to different villages to perform their dances and all. So, all 16 tribes will have their own dormitory and all. They have their own place in the festival venue. And they do their dances over there also in their place where they have this morum. And they do dances even in the central arena also. So in that sense, the festival is still good to go to, but I would say at least try and avoid the first 3-4 days. Earlier, the festival used to happen from 1st to 7th of December. Now they've made it 1st to 10th of December. So I would advise people to come into the festival after 5th of December. Then most of the crowd would have gone, or a lot of crowd would have gone.
And the dates are
And it
fixed.
would be easier to find place also.
And the dates are fixed. It's 1st to 10th December.
Yes, it's 1st to 10th of December.
Okay. So it's worth going, but plan well in advance and book well in advance.
Yes. Any other questions?
I had one. So in general, when you're moving around in all of the northeast states, what is like the general mode of commute? Like North India has tuk-tuk. So like generally once you're there, how do you move about?
Yeah, so we were coming to that. Okay, let me come to that a little bit later on. Okay, there is a slide for that also. So let me come to that a little bit later.
Okay.
Yeah, any other question?
But just Mahvish has, in terms of meals, on most of the tours, are meals provided by the accommodation only on the tribal tours, or?
Yes. Meals are provided by the accommodation in these places. Even en route and all, you don't have too many meals. Generally, you would only have one point where you can have lunch or something when you're traveling. On the day you're traveling, on a lot of these circuits, especially in Nagaland and Eastern, Central, Arunachal and all, you would only have one lunch point where you will have lunch. And dinner and all, breakfast, dinner is generally provided by the homestay or the hotel. You don't have any other restaurants or anything of that sort.
I'm guessing it doesn't have too much of a restaurant culture apart from like...
No. And generally, at least foreigners enjoy the traditional food and all. They enjoy the local food. They like to try out.
Yeah, and that also for India, somebody guess, as long as it's B&Bs and homestays where they offer good food, then it's perfect. And Mahvish, I had another question. So on the tribal tours, do you have an accompanying guide or then?
Okay, so we are coming to that. Okay. So can I move on?
Yes, please.
Okay. So now, what do I expect from you guys in terms of details? What details do I need when I'm planning a tour of Northeast India? I need to know the number of people. I need to know their interests. This is very, very important. Probably this is the most important thing. What are they interested in? And if they have any specific places they would like to visit. Sometimes some clients will say, I have 20 days at hand, whatever, these are my interests, you arrange the tour. Sometimes clients will say, no, I want to visit Zero Valley, I want to visit Mon to see, or, I want to visit Kaziranga or Majuli or something. Then I will incorporate those places into the itinerary. along with whatever other interests they have told me. So this is probably the most important thing I would need to plan an itinerary. Then the approximate start date or month, because season also matters to me. Sometimes I will arrange my itineraries in certain ways and all, like, if they want to do Kaziranga, but they want to do it at the beginning of the season. So, I will probably put Kaziranga at the end of the tour instead of in the starting of the tour and things of that sort. I need to know their budget, approximate budget, and I need to know the days at hand. So this is the piece of information which I need to know before I kind of start planning an itinerary for the client. Okay, so this is now a map of the Northeast and putting it all together. So when I'm putting it all together, I look at the interest of the clients and I look at the number of days at hand. As I said, if they only have 7 or 8 days at hand, then probably the most ideal places would either be Assam, or it would be Meghalaya, or it would be a little bit of both. But if they have more than 15 days at hand, then based on their interest, then we could do either Meghalaya and Assam, Arunachal and Assam, Arunachal and Nagaland. So there are lots of permutations and combinations which we can play around with depending on their interest, days at hand. Now, once I have the itinerary in place and all, how do we make the logistical arrangements? So we arrange for their stays based on what we have mentioned in the itinerary and what interest they have told us. So generally when I give the itinerary, I mention the name of the homestay or I mention the name of the hotel also, which the clients are free to look up on. Once they have agreed, we will do the booking in those particular homestays or hotels. If they are not available, then we will try and give them some alternative if possible. Once that is done, I will determine the vehicle type. If it is 2 people, and if they are doing a tour of, let's say, only Assam and Meghalaya, then I can give them a small car like a Swift Desire or something of that sort. But a Swift Desire will not work in Nagaland, and even maybe in Western Arunachal it might work, but it will not work in Eastern Arunachal and other parts because the road conditions are not very good. Plus the other thing is that I also need to determine where I'm taking my driver from. So my drivers either come from Guwahati side or Dibrugarh side. So certain drivers are conversant with certain circuits. A Guwahati driver will not be conversant with circuits of Eastern Arunachal and of upper parts of Nagaland and all. For that I will need to take a driver from Dibrugarh side. So if it's 2 people, if they are on a tight budget and if they are, let's say, only doing Assam, Meghalaya, or let's say in Nagaland they are only doing Kohima with something else, then I can give them a small car like a Swift Desire. If their budget allows, then I will either give them an Innova or most probably I will give them a Scorpio. So Innovas generally come from Guwahati side, from Guwahati sector, because that is where most of the Innova drivers are from. And Scorpios, they are the best working vehicles when we are doing tours of Arunachal and Nagaland. So those drivers mainly come from Jorhat side or from Dibrugarh side. So now does this answer your question? What vehicles? And the vehicles will be with them throughout the trip. In Northeast India, you cannot do a kind of a backpacking trip using public transport. That is not possible. Because every state has its own mode of transport and all. And transport in certain parts are only to the main town. Then you cannot get into the village and things of that sort. It's very complicated. That is why we give a kind of a vehicle throughout the trip. Right? Then generally we arrange for local guides at all places. Rather than giving one guide throughout the trip, I personally prefer to give local guides. There are 2 things to this. One is that it gets down the cost of the trip. Generally, when I'm employing a kind of a full-time guide, I have to pay him roughly around 3,500 to 4,000 rupees a day. That is what the guide charges, okay, which includes his stay and food and everything. If a client can afford that, then yes, but otherwise, we give them, so to get the cost down, we give them local guides. The other thing is that Northeast, one guide may not know, he might know the gross facts about a particular tribe, but he may not know the finer details about a particular tribe. So that is another issue with Northeast, because there are so many tribes. You know, every tribe has its own culture and all. Also, in one particular tribe, in every village, they will have a different unique story about the village also. And what I have seen or noticed is that a local guide will be able to explain these kind of nuances in a much better way than a kind of a professional moving guide. The other thing is that, you know, a professional moving guide will have his own set villages where he is comfortable with, where he or she knows very well and all. And he will be able to give them an experience. Whereas a local guide will be more flexible, he will have a better rapport. You know, because the main thing about these cultural tours is, you know, taking people into the villages and giving them an experience. That is why the guide needs to have a good rapport with the villagers, you know, so that he can take them into a house and all. Generally, a full-time guide, when he goes, you know, he has a rapport with certain families and all, or, you know, he has a rapport with a certain village, because he is not belonging to that particular tribe. Okay, he could be an Assamese, or he could be an Apatani, or he could be somebody from Western Arunachal. So he is still seen as an outsider who is not having knowledge of, let's say, that particular tribe. But on the other hand, if I send a local guide, his English may not be very, very good, but the kind of experience he will be able to give to the client will be much better. So that is the thing. So, you know, whereas a full-time guide has probably better command over English and all, it works out expensive, plus he may not be able to give kind of nuances and experiences to that level. Okay, whereas on the other hand, a local guide will be able to do a better kind of job of it, but may not necessarily have great communication skills. So there are pros and cons of both. We need to weigh them. Generally, on most India Someday tours, and even on my own personal tours which we get, we arrange for local guides and not for full-time guides. Okay, then the last thing is permits. As I mentioned, foreigners need permits mainly for Arunachal. For the other northeastern states, foreigners do not require any permits as such. I have already explained to you guys when I was discussing about Arunachal about the permit system. So they are given a 30-day permit. I need at least 10 days to arrange for the permits, for which I need a copy of their passport and their visa. Right? So that is it.
Thanks
So
a
do
lot.
you guys have any questions?
This permit called as?
Sorry?
What is the name of this permit?
It is called an RAP, Restricted Area Permit.
Okay.
But only
Thank
for
you.
Arunachal. None of the other states require permit.
Yeah, and none of the other. So at one point of time, all the northeastern states needed a permit. But for foreigners, you know, to encourage tourism and all, they have dropped it in the other northeastern states. But in Arunachal, they have still kept it mainly due to its proximity to China, mainly because of the China threat.
And that's the same with Sikkim also. That
Yes, but Sikkim, Sikkim, so they give it on the gate only. Sikkim, so the permit is issued now at the entry point itself.
Okay, okay. Because it's the same even with Andaman and Nicobar. Nowadays, no, they don't need a permit. You don't need a permit.
Yeah.
You need a permit. So Farhan, yeah, I think also because of the transportation, and this is something for the team also, that, I mean, we cannot cater to backpacker trips in Northeast because, I mean, they can go and do it on their own, but as India Someday people, we will not be able to support them because of the combination of transport and And a lot of Rajasthan and North India, we are able to do backpacker trips because they're very good train connections. So I can do a very
Right.
good Rajasthan route to train connection, which is not, I'm guessing again, not possible with Northeast. So again, this is again for the entire team and which we've discussed, but I think we'll need at least a certain level. It doesn't mean that only our luxury clients, because at the end of the day, if it's two people and we are giving car and stay, then it's as expensive as even like a upper budget or a comfort client in Rajasthan.
Yeah. So I think Mavish has asked what budget are we looking at? Maybe for two people, we are roughly looking at 10,000 rupees a day, roughly.
And this would include stay,
This would include stay with breakfast.
travel, guides, and few other.
Yeah, local guide and transport.
Yeah. So this, like, yeah. So guys, this is if we're talking about a 10-day trip, 10,000.
Yeah, so roughly a lakh to 1,20,000, roughly.
Yeah. But a lakh, okay, a lakh for 10 days, a lakh would be about 1,200 euros. So we're talking about 600 euros per person for a 10-day trip, including stay, transport.
No, not 10,000 per person. I'm saying 10,000 for a couple.
Yeah, so 10,000 for a couple would be a lakh. So it's about 1,200.
Just a minute, I'll just come.
Yeah. But so girls, so this is roughly 1,200, 600 euros per person for a 10-day trip, including stay, travel, few activities. So basically we can sell to Northeast to anyone except for our budget and backpacker. So even if in case we have a younger couple who's 27, 28 and want to do Northeast, we can give it if they're fine already spending that much. Y'all have any other questions which we can?
Anything else?
Guys, any other questions? Schnell, Viveka, especially, you've always had questions for how to sell Northeast, or does this help you all now understand Northeast better, at least as a starting point when it comes to speaking to clients?
Yes, definitely more perspective now. So that's nice. Thanks, Ran.
And any other questions?
Even afterwards, if you all have some questions or something, you all can send me a WhatsApp or whatever.
Piran, I did have one question because I've told everyone different stories. So how exactly did you get into KPPO and how did you get into Northeast Tours?
Basically, I used to work in the IT industry and I was a little fed up with my job. So I decided to kind of take a sabbatical from my job. And luckily, through a friend of mine, I got an opportunity to do some voluntary work with one NGO in Sikkim. And that was on a community tourism project in North Sikkim in Lachen. I worked with them for around 1.5 months. And then they had another kind of a tourism project on trekking and all, which was my interest. So I worked with them on that project also. And I really liked the kind of work I was doing over there. It was way more satisfying. Fortunately, through that network, I met up with one or two more people, who were doing good work on community tourism in the Northeast. So then I worked with the Bodo community in Manas, in Assam, for a couple of months, and that was a life-changing experience. Because as an outsider, you had only heard negative things about the Bodo people and their violent movement and all. But when I actually went there, people were amazingly friendly. I could walk freely in the village. I could just go into anybody's house and all. And, people would just welcome me with open arms. And for me, that was kind of pretty much an eye-opener. And, slowly in this way, around for a year, I was traveling to parts of Northeast by doing some voluntary work and all. And then I kind of, thought of how I can sustain myself by doing something of this sort. That is how I started off with, KPPO specifically to promote Northeast India to kind of help the local communities earn some livelihood, and also, to kind of eradicate this negative vibes which people from mainland had about the Northeast. And that is what I've been doing since the last 10 years.
Nice. Thank you. And with KPP also, a lot of the homestays and places, these are things that you've developed and you've supported. And
I wouldn't say we have developed, but yes, quite a few of them we have supported through the initial days and all, quite a few homestays and all.
So for us, when we are speaking to clients, it would be fair to say that booking a trip with KPPO and going to the Northeast, you're impacting the local economy very directly by always employing local.
Absolutely.
And wherever possible, you're using sustainable means of tourism.
Absolutely. Means they will see it and feel it.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Does anyone team any other questions? Okay.
Bas Nevish has said something. If Piran can share some pictures.
Some pictures.
Yeah.
Pictures of what means? My God, I have got kind of gigabytes of pictures. That is why I had asked Abbas, like, if we should probably, I don't know, I'll see if these places, some of the places which are mentioned, if I can put up some pictures and make a gallery and send it to you guys or something, then you all can have a look at that.
Yeah, and if it's categorized as per at least even states, so we'll get more of a picture.
Yeah, I'll do something like that. Give me some time.
Sure. No worries.
I'll do that.
Cool, Firan. Thanks a lot. Yeah. That was wonderful. Long pending.
Okay.
It was really nice, and I really want to go to Northeast now. But thanks a lot, yeah. And I'll send you a recording of this once I upload.
Sure. No worries, yeah.
And Firan, maybe also some point later, if you want to do a shorter one just on Sikkim, that would also be nice since we missed Sikkim this time.
Okay. Now we'll do something on Sikkim also.
Yeah,
Sikkim,
just specific.
Darjeeling.
Because Sikkim, Darjeeling, you can also do more alpine hikes and things like that.
Sure.
It combines sometimes with Varanasi. We can sell it as a 7-8 day thing, or with Kolkata. And we're doing a little bit of Orissa also now. So with that, it can, be a nice add-on. So we do that another time. But this was excellent. Thanks a lot.
Okay, my pleasure.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.